Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: boss forbade us to use, but soon canceled this stupid policy. The second story: woman wanted to pay with coins, but did not want to wait, so she paid with banknotes. The third story: listen to the employees of the department who tell you something about the environment in which you work. Today's first story is: no phones allowed at work. Tell them to call me directly. I work in healthcare where phones are not to be used while on the floor caring for patients, etc., for privacy and WHS reasons, which is fine and understandable. Most of us have our phones on us or in the break room and don't use them unless on break or away from patient care areas. None of us check our phones while busy, and if they do, we'll always get called out for it by other staff. We were all recently in a meeting where we were told we are no longer allowed to have our phones on us, as it is a distraction and against policy, meaning not to be used unless we're out of the unit or off hospital grounds. A few people piped up and said they had young kids in care, where their phone was the direct communication for the carers, or there are issues at home that they needed to have their phone to have quick contact if needed, even if it was left in their handbag and could be checked on breaks. Not only that, but we have a half-hour unpaid lunch break, where we should be able to use our phones as we see fit, but this was also denied, as it's still in a healthcare setting, and could cause WHS issues. Now, I know working in healthcare and personal mobile phones don't mix, as it really is against policy. However, the issue with denying us complete access was a total overreaction. The issues with requiring quick and direct contact with home or other outside work contacts was brushed off, and we were told if the issues were that bad at home, we shouldn't be at work. Many people were a bit taken aback by this, by saying a lot of the home issues are resolved by a quick text, back, and not allowing us access to our phones while at work was a bit unreasonable. Our manager said if that's the case, we can give people her direct work number, and for contact to go through her and she will relay the message to us, or give the phone to us to talk to whoever's calling. So cue malicious compliance. We all gave our at-home, spouses, carers, schools, etc. the direct work line to call for any reason, if they're unable to get in contact with us directly, and the phone started ringing continuously. First was a lady whose husband needed approval for a big financial decision at home. The next was a vet calling to tell a coworker their dog needed to be put down. I got a call from my children's daycare saying my son had been bitten and was bleeding. Mandatory reporting policy. There were several other phone calls within the span of a few hours, with my manager running to find us to relay messages or pull us off the floor so we could speak to the callers, wasting more time than if we were allowed to shoot through a quick text or take a quick phone call while on our breaks. The next day, we were told we can have access to our phones while on break, and to please tell our home contacts to stop calling the manager's phone. It took a few days for everyone to get the message, meaning there were still many unnecessary calls coming through, but it made it obvious that the need for communication lines to be open at home was important. Is such a stupid policy legal? Do they pay you for your lunch hour? If not, they have no control over what you do when you go to lunch, because it's your free time. Or if you're not allowed to use the phone during your break, your employer will have to pay you. Not only do they need to change the behavior, but they need to understand why it's unacceptable. It reminds me of my current job. We're also not allowed to carry phones, but everyone has them. Before, the bosses didn't have a problem with it, but the bosses came. But there is a plus. Where I work, there is virtually no mobile signal, so even on the breaks we can't use the phone. Some managers just like to flaunt their power without really using their common sense and not understanding the people they are hired to manage are people. The next story is malicious compliance to malicious compliance. I run a repair shop where I employ a bunch of local kids, ages 16 plus, to learn skills and make some money while we generally sit around and talk about the world while we fix things. We had a client come in with a busted electronic. We fixed it up for her and gave her a decent discount on the work. Her final bill for parts and 4 hours of labor was $100 even, discounted down from $220. She didn't like the bill. She didn't like the work. She claimed that we'd broken something else. She claimed that the kid who did the work didn't know what she was doing. She did, and I had supervised her, and that the kid who helped her in the front room was rude to her. He wasn't, but she didn't like the little pride flag pin he was wearing. She demanded to see the manager, so I popped out, listened to her tear into my kids, validated how she was feeling, but pointed out that the work she's asked for was done correctly, and her bill was due on pickup of the piece. The last straw for her came when she pulled out a credit card, and I had to inform her that we don't accept that particular card. She literally asked me, "Do you know who I am?" Which I didn't, still don't care, and I told her we'd take a personal check. She wrote out a check, problem solved. I deposited the day's checks and got a note from my bank that one had bounced. Her check, of course. I called her the next day to inform her that her check had been returned for insufficient funds and that she'd need to come in and pay her bill, plus the extra fee for a return check. All of these fees, just to point this out, were clearly outlined on the service agreement she'd signed, and we'd already discounted her $120 just to be nice. Anyway, she rolls up into the office carrying a bag, and I knew exactly what was going on. She drops, of course, a bag of pennies on the front desk. She's breathing heavily. We're on the second floor and she'd taken the stairs, and she announces triumphantly that she's here to pay her bill. She just needs to go get the rest of our hard-earned money. Said with a sneer, of course. The kid at the front desk looked like he's about to cry, so I stop working on the thing I'm working on and take over. "How many more bags do you have?" I ask her, and she says that the nice people at the bank loaded them up in her car. She didn't count them. I told her that was fine. We'd wait for her to bring them all up and then settle up her bill. She was expecting a bigger reaction, I think. Either that or she hadn't thought this through. 10,000 pennies plus the extra $25 weighs a lot, and she's just committed to carrying them through a parking lot and up a flight of stairs. One of my kids, bless his heart, offered to help her carry them. She refused. Finally, shaking and sweaty, she deposited the last of the bags on the countertop. The pennies were loose, not in coin rolls. She'd done some work to prove her point. What she hadn't counted on was that we'd need to count the pennies. While the other kids took care of other clients and fixed things in the back, the front desk guy and I counted up the pennies. She started to realize that this was going to take a while and tried to leave. I told her that she couldn't leave until we'd signed off on her bill, since at this point she was in violation of her service agreement and had passed a bad check. We couldn't just take her word for it, and I would inform our local constabulary if she left without paying. I was kinda talking out of my A, but she'd managed to tick me off a little. The other clients in the shop came and went and we counted. Phone calls came in and were handled by my kids and we counted. She sat down in a chair, folding steel, not super comfortable, stood up again, walked around the office, and we counted. After a while, she said just forget it, and took out $125 in bills. We signed off on her agreement and she started to leave. Another one of my kids, bless his heart, asked her if she wanted help carrying the pennies back to her car. She looked at all of us with a face of sheer panic, mumbled no thank you, just keep them, and bolted. The whole shop was silent for a moment. Then one of the kids started giggling and nobody could stop. People coming in thought we'd gone nuts, and I finally had to banish everybody to the back room until they could breathe again. We loaded the bags into my vehicle. We used the elevator she'd walked by a few times, took them to the bank and used the coin machine to deposit them, then wrote out a donation to our local shelter for the amount she'd dropped off. She posted something nasty on Facebook about it and got ratioed. She had, of course, posted earlier about what she was going to do, and got called out with her own post. My favorite response was something like, "You said you were going to pay your bill in pennies. You paid your bill in pennies, what went wrong?" Please don't pay your bill in pennies, folks, especially if you're just doing it to be a D. This customer caused her own problems. Ha! She could have paid you with a bill and not brought coins. Then she wouldn't have had to wait. FYI, just because it's legal tender doesn't mean you have to accept them, unless you're a government agency, aka government. Private parties can have payment in any form you want, like Pebbles if you're so inclined. In my country, you can refuse payment attempts on more than 100 tenders without technically refusing to pay. Of course, Karens are unaware of this, and it leads to amazing lawsuits. In many jurisdictions, you don't have to accept more than X coins as payment, apparently to avoid this behavior. Now, if the OP demands payment before service, the OP can demand payment in any form he wants. It reminds me of a story my mother once told me. She was in a restaurant, and for some reason she had more change than cash. She had a habit of rolling her change into coin rolls before she went to pay, only to be told that they wouldn't accept coin rolls. In true MC style, she dumped everything on the counter. The last story is, all vehicles need to be shut down, even if they won't start again. I am a career Army officer. I'm also in the artillery. Many years ago, I was in a howitzer battery. We had a new officer posted in, Scott, who was responsible for all administration and the defense of the battery when in the field. I was the officer in charge of the firing of the battery's guns. So in essence, the guns belonged to me, but my guns and the entirety of the support system belonged to Scott. Scott's earlier unit time was in another part of the country where it did not get as cold as it did in winter where we were working. I had a few years facing Arctic air masses, so I knew what to expect in the field. Scott knew, but in reality, there's a stark difference from being aware and experiencing. One January exercise, the entire unit was out in the field training en masse. My battery was in a rather nicely secluded area, shielded from the winds by trees. The overnight temperature dropped to about 38 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, skin freezes in less than a minute, and fuel can freeze inside vehicles. Our unit's unwritten rule was that if the temperature dropped below -20 degrees Celsius, the vehicles would remain running. That meant that when we needed to power the howitzers for firing or moving, they would be guaranteed to have that power. So we move into this nice secluded position, and we're going to be there overnight. Scott gets out of his vehicle, and because he can't feel the breeze, he orders all the vehicles to turn off except the ambulance, in case of injury. Tactically, his order made sense, as we would be making less noise. But I informed Scott that this is a bad idea, as the vehicles will not turn on if we kill the engine due to the fuel, oil, and batteries freezing. Scott was having none of it. He thought we only wanted vehicles running because of the heaters, and that made us soft soldiers. In reality, although the heat is nice from the vehicle, the Army gave us good cold weather kit, and it was actually warmer to set up our tents and live in them than to sit in a vehicle. I tell Scott I don't agree, but as he's in charge, I would order the vehicles shut down. So I did. My non-commissioned officers all thought I had lost my sanity in the cold. I turned around and told them that this was Scott's order, and they understood. This was not the first time he tried to have us do something that was based upon his other unit's practices. So the battery went silent. 7 hours later, we got orders to move. I called the appropriate people to the command post and issued orders. Scott was there, and we would be leaving in 90 minutes. Time to pack up and get everything ready. That is until... Not a single vehicle would start. Every single one of them, approximately 18 of them, were frozen chunks of metal. I immediately ordered the ambulance to go around and start slaving the vehicles, and gave them a priority. Slaving is similar to boosting the vehicle. Once the ambulance got the first 4 vehicles started, 2 of them moved out to slave the rest, and the ambulance went back to being an ambulance. We moved out of our gun positions 2 hours late, and were subsequently 2 hours late getting ready to fire with the rest of the unit. The commanding officer was not impressed. The battery commander got hold of me and asked me what was going on. I told him, and I could almost hear the chuckle in his voice as he talked to me on the radio. I guess he had done something similar years previously. In the end, Scott was a good sport about it. He took it on the chin and chalked it up to experience. His lesson, when those in the unit tell you something about the environment where you're working, it is best to listen to them. Military stories almost all end in malevolent compliance. It seems to me that the sheer amount of compliance required makes much of it malicious. In general, I don't understand why people don't listen to those who are clearly more experienced than they are. People don't just talk. If someone is trying to communicate something to you, it's important to them that you hear and listen to them. And it's probably important to you too if you're the one they're talking to. Subscribe, hit the like button, and have a good day.